Cool.
So, I think what we have left to do in the class is, like I told you, we're going to read Isaiah. Not all of it, obviously. We're going to do the other minor prophets like Micah, and then we're going to read Ezekiel. So if we have time left after that, we'll discuss, maybe we'll do something else. But could always go back and take a look at the Samuel books, but those are very complicated, as I told you. So we were doing Hosea last time, and as I recall, do you remember if we got all the way through it or we left off at some point?
Yeah.
We went through it. Yeah, we went through it. We went through it, okay. Well, he basically parallels Amos, and he's being written at a time when the Assyrians haven't come yet. That's pretty clear. So I think you can say these are probably pretty historical in their, present state. I don't think they've been rewritten to any great degree. Now, there's a problem with Micah, because Micah really doesn't look like it's a real piece of literature or work, because it overlaps Isaiah to some extent. And in fact, it has one of the same lines. So when you get books that have the same line, you kind of wonder which one had it first. And, because we always think the line that they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks, which is a very famous line from Isaiah. And yet Micah has the same line. So you kind of, it leaves you sort of wondering which came first, Micah or Hosea. Are they really different? We'll see in Isaiah, you can't really trust the ascription to who the person actually is. But let's look at this. Michael of Moreshet, in the time of Jotam, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah. Isaiah, in the time of Uzziah, Jotam, Ahaz, Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So basically it's almost the exact same period. He just throws in another king, Uzziah. Say, who are these kings? Well, you have to go to the book of Kings, and I don't think you'll discover very much there, just a few lines or something. And usually, and he did what pleased the Lord, or he didn't do what pleased the Lord, and that's to a certain extent what you get there. But let's look at Micah, and then we'll go back and look at Isaiah. Once again, the thing that jumps out at one is the fact that the prophets seem to really have a negative attitude towards the northern kingdom. So you can see that people think that, oh, it's just the whole of Israel. In Micah, maybe it's not as clear cut, and it wasn't totally clear cut in Hosea, but on the whole, it was the north that came in for the clear admonition and condemnation, and Amos is certainly that way. So let's see how Micah handles this theme. Other than that, these are all parallel works. There's nothing really new that you can say about them, one as opposed to the other, unless you like the poetry. Now, first of all, notice this, same symbolism, line 5. Because of the crime of Jacob, the sin of the house of Israel. And what is the crime of Jacob? Samaria. Well, you see, you maybe are not familiar with what Samaria is. I don't know if you have maps in the back of your Bible, but if you look at some point, if you read the book of Kings or Chronicles, you'll see that the capital moved from the city of Shechem in the north, I'm talking about the northern capital, a little bit further along to what they call Samaria, which is the name of the whole place. Can you see Samaria on that map there? Let's see what you've got. My maps have fallen out. Let me see your maps there. Let's see.
My stalwart,
Okay, so let's see. There's Samaria here, and there's Shechem below it. Samaria, Shechem, and then down here someplace further down is Benjamin, Jerusalem, and so on. So Samaria looks like it's far away from Shechem. They're both in the, as you see, you have some shadows on this map, so you can see that it's in the highlands. Shadows in the map on that particular Bible show you that it's hill country. And of course, where there aren't any shadows, of course, you're not in hill country. So it's pretty plainly hill country. Can you tell them? I'm looking for one of these things to draw on the board with, which probably is the only thing I probably forgot. Let's see if I can find it here. I'm in there. Yeah, great. I've got everything but the pen here. Here's the pen. If it'll work. So, this one's going to be no good, but we might get some life out of it. So the hill country is here. Jerusalem is in the middle of the hill country going down to Hebron. And then Bethel is here, as we've said. They're all along the spine here. Why are they here? Because it's protected. The people in the plains can't come up and get them. But it also means it's more primitive because they don't have the riches, the agriculture, the industrial development, whatever might have been. It's just hill country sort of thing, which would be flocks and olive trees. That's basically all they will have had up there. They wouldn't have had any, it's like going up to Scotland in England. Scotland is hill country, so the Romans built a wall to keep them out. So Scotland is, much more primitive always than England, much less densely populated. So somehow these people developed an ethos, and these other areas they couldn't control. And so this is Shechem here, and then this is Samaria. See, since this is all very vivid to me because I've driven through here tens of times. So it's something that it just comes naturally to me to visualize it. Whereas if you've not been there, I can tell you where, Garden Grove is in relation to, Encino, but you're not going to take it in. If you can't see it if you haven't been there. So I keep on harping on it for your benefit, but it's really important. So Samaria is the final place where the capital is moved to. And then the New Testament, as you know, or may have heard, picks up on that image of the Samaritan. And it's really interesting because the New Testament knows, people who wrote the New Testament, you say it's Jesus, I don't consider it, as I've told you, to have anything to do with Jesus. But anyway, the people who wrote that particular document know very well that the Jews don't like the Samaritans. And they mean by Jews the Southerners, because there are no Northerners left. So who are the Samaritans? By the time of the New Testament, the Samaritans have become mixed with a lot of subject populations that have been, according to the Southerners anyway, whether that's true or not, we don't know, that's their view, that have been resettled there, like officers in an army would get land someplace, like the Romans would give out land, or these others, other conquering peoples would have to pay their soldiers something. They would transport the conquered people and give the conquerors their property. So when they destroyed the north, the Southerners contend that others were moved in there, particularly Greek, and mixed in with the local population. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But the Samaritan in the New Testament then is Samaria, Samaritan. That's a symbol for all the newcomers coming into Pauline Christianity, as opposed to the so-called promises of Jesus' own people. So it's the Good Samaritan that helps him, whereas his own people spit on him and do things like that to him, supposedly. It's all very purposefully done to make it seem as if Jesus is reaching out to the newcomers and the newcomers like him. So the Samaritan is not considered really an Israelite in the New Testament as such. He's just a stranger. And that's how the Southerners would have seen it. Now, if you go to Samaritans, and there are still Samaritans, they don't see it like that. They think they really are the legitimate heirs of the Northern Kingdom. They still have a synagogue, though, with all the Palestinian issues that have occurred in the last 25 years. A lot of them have left Shechem, which is called Nablus, as I told you. For up till recently, you could go up there with them and they sacrificed the Paschal lamb on the Mount Ebal and Gerizim like Joshua, because Joshua is supposed to be the hero. And I told you they have 6 books of the Bible and they don't recognize any of the others, including the prophets. And they only recognize the 6 books, the Law of Moses and Joshua. And a lot of them have, though, because there were only about 600 of them left in recent times, have moved down to Tel Aviv and have gotten Jewish wives for their children so they could revive the situation. And there's a big center of them in the town south of Tel Aviv along the seacoast called Holon. It's south of Jaffa, and it's a seaside town. And there are more there now than in Shechem. So they're beginning to resuscitate themselves, and maybe there's 850 left instead of 650 left. But they still exist, and if you want to talk to them, they'll tell you, no, we're the legitimate descendants. And I think the only way you can solve that one is to do some DNA testing, and be interested to see what the results would be. I think they should do DNA everywhere as a historical tool, because if people are willing to do it, it's a tremendous, it settles all kinds of issues in terms of where people came from, who they are, what the migration patterns were, and so on. So I wish for that sort of thing. So Samaria, as you see, comes in for a lot of abuse here. And Samaria is identified with Jacob and Israel. So Jacob is not really a southern hero. He's really a northern hero, and as it becomes Israel, he's more of a northern hero. And so who are the southern heroes? Well, basically David and Abraham. I mean Jacob occasionally, but when the prophets are speaking, Jacob stands for the north. And he does here as well. Now here you see the house of Judah also sins. What is the sin of the house of Judah? Jerusalem. But, it's a very lukewarm slap on the wrist. And you get the feeling the prophet really doesn't believe it. He's just trying to be even-handed. So, again, his attention is, once again, fixed on Samaria. Is it because he knows Samaria is going to be destroyed? Is this retrospective? Does he know the Assyrians are going to come in this 720s, 30s period and destroy the north and south will be saved? Possibly. Anyway, I mean to make Samaria a ruin in the open country, a place for vines. So this could be retrospective. What do you think? Do you think this is retrospective? Written after the fact, back? Quite possible. Possible. I can't conclude on that, but it's pretty close to the time anyway. If it's after the fact, he's seeing the ruins and he's saying, you see, this is what happened. I'm not sure though. I mean, it's very hard to say. I will set our stones rolling into the valley. These are really vivid images. And will lay her foundations there, and all her images, all her idols will be shattered, because there's obviously non-Yahwist activity going on strongly in the north, according to the prophets. And again, the prostitutes' earnings. For prostitutes' earnings, they have been collected, and prostitutes' earnings, they will be again. What do you have for a translation of that line 7 in your Bible? Anyone have something different?
I shall leave all their idols derelict. They were amassed out of prostitutes' earnings, and prostitutes' earnings once more they will be.
Well, I have a tradition about Jesus from the Talmud that obviously draws on this passage here, right, that I know about. It's in both of my books, but not many people speak about that. But whenever I read this, suddenly it comes home to me that this is where it comes from. A rabbi is Jesus isn't mentioned very often in the Talmud, but in any case, a rabbi is in Galilee, and he's a rabbi with known Judeo-Christian sympathies, and he meets someone called Jacob, James, possibly James, the brother of Jesus, but someone called Jacob. They call him Tvar Sakanya, and they say, they pose to him, they talk to him about Jesus the Nazarene, they call him. They said, what do you know about Jesus the Nazarene? He said, oh, well, I know a tradition about Jesus the Nazarene. He said, oh, well, what was that? They said, what should you do with a prostitute's earnings given to the temple? What should you do with a prostitute's earnings, the wages of a prostitute given to the temple? Someone, I don't know who asked him this question, and Jesus responds, according to this tradition, they should build a latrine for the high priest with it. They should build a latrine for the high priest with it. And then he says, well, why is that? He said, well, it's out of, I hate to say filth, but that out of filth it came, and filth it should remain. So it's obviously a play off this passage here, I think. Maybe you don't see that. It jumps out at me like that. And I think that shows Jesus has a very funny sense of humor, and I think it's a pretty, I think it's a pretty authentic saying actually. But it's the only thing in the whole town that's left there in terms of what he may or may not have said. Anyway, I use that in my book quite a bit for various points. Anyway, this passage seems to relate to it. So now, the lamenting, the jackals, the ruins, the ruined country. But you see, the Yahweh, 9, is behind all this. Everything is attributed to the God. That's how they saw it. He reaches even into Judea. So I think this has already happened. Because this is so accurate. This is what really happened. To the very door of my people, Jerusalem. In fact, maybe it was written while Jerusalem was under siege. May even have been written during the siege, because this person seems to know that the north is destroyed and the south is actually about to be destroyed, but because of Hezekiah's tunnel. And look at Hezekiah as the last king mentioned here. It didn't happen. And I think that's really pretty impressive. It could be right at the moment. Anyway, he changes gears here. Let's see if we can pick up anything else. For doom has come down, line 12, to the very gates of Jerusalem. Again, he emphasizes that. He emphasizes that we're at the gates, but it hasn't come, you see, it hasn't happened. And look at Lachish. Harness the horse, the chariot, you live in Lachish. Remember I told you about Lachish? Remember I mentioned Lachish? What did I say about Lachish? Does anyone remember? There's actually letters that were found in Lachish talking about the fact they were under siege, writing to Jerusalem, asking for help. And these have been found. I think it was in the ruins there that were dug up, whether they were cuneiform or how they survived, I don't know. But there are actually documents called the Lachish letters, telling them, that the enemy is there, that they're surrounded, that they need help, and so on and so forth. And this is right here at this moment here, you see. So people who want verification that the Bible is true to a large extent, just look at that one. This is 700 BC. It mentions, so this person seems to know that Lachish is either under siege or in trouble or threatened. You say, well, where's Lachish? I never even heard of the place. Well, funnily enough, it's not in the hill country. It's sort of down over here. On the way to Gaza. Here would be Gaza. In fact, when I went to Gaza, the one time I went to Gaza, when in those days you could go everywhere, there was no terrorists, there was no bomb throwers. The bomb throwers came in with the Carter peace process, and the bomb throwers all came in with Secretary Baker calling the Madrid conference when he armed them all. Now he's forcing the Israelis to give up the border checkpoints. So it's not just going to be machine guns, it's going to be rockets and everything they're going to be pouring in through there. All these so-called fair things that they impose upon Israel actually result in the very opposite for Israel. And there's not been one step that hasn't been reversed in the actual activity of it. So, pardon me for being cynical, I'm very anti all these things, I apologize. But I've witnessed it all, and I lived on the West Bank. I know what it was like. It was as peaceful it was as peaceful as me to walk down to the cafeteria. And I was living in total Arab areas. And everyone was extremely happy in terms of the fact that their lives were much better. They're all buying television sets, they're all adding on to their houses, they're all building, you could see the television antennas popping up everywhere and so on. I don't say that they like being under other people's control in any way, but they were under Jordan's control previously. So this was a much better situation than they had under Jordan. Then someone got the idea that, oh, well, let's do a liberation movement and make it look like it's the Israelis have caused all the problems here. When in fact, the Jordanians had them under total, submission previously. But nobody remembers that. And of course, no Arab TV station or anyone is ever going to mention it. So in any case, unless you watch the thing superficially, it looks, oh, well, these are all good things. But in the process, now you can't drive to any of these places. Now there's violence everywhere, and there'll be more and more violence. In any case, when I was there, it was like total paradise in terms of you could go any place, everyone invited you into their homes. You wouldn't be even afraid of someone trying to knife you. I mean, I lived in the Arab territories. I lived on the Mount of Olives. I lived out by Ramallah, which is near Bethel. Which is not far from Saul's palace in Gibeah. I was all Arabs. I rented from Arabs. And it was, maybe you should write about that period when I finish this book and give a picture of how really wonderful it was. That was from the period around 67 to 73. And then Carter came in with the peace process. And it was all downhill after that. Because it's really weird because we think of Carter as a saint, but in fact, the result of what he was doing was the opposite, at least for the Israelis. For the Palestinians, you say, oh, well, look at that. No, they haven't benefited. Their whole economy has been deconstructed. They have no life whatsoever. The whole thing has been, put into ruins, shattered. Anything they previously had is destroyed. So, it's not just the Israelis are benefited, nobody's benefited, the opposite. In any case, let's leave that behind. I'm just telling you how I know these places. I used to drive all over them. I went to Lachish on my way to Gaza. You could drive into Gaza today. You wouldn't set foot in Gaza without getting your throat cut, probably. Then you could drive, and there was no police force, repressing anybody. No one felt hostile. You have to be whipped up. You have to be taught to hate, is what they used to say. You have to be whipped into a frenzy by agitators, which is what's happened. But I could go into Gaza and went down to the beach there and sat along the beach and saw the young Arab men pumping iron and all that kind of stuff on the beach. Nobody bothered me. It was just like sort of going out here and someplace like Oceanside or something. Nothing. Anyway, on the way down, I stopped at Lachish. So that's how I know Lachish is on the way to Gaza. So it's quite far from Jerusalem. It's in the south, but it's quite far from Jerusalem. So the fact that he mentions Lachish sounds pretty authentic to me. Okay. So I don't know what the other stuff means here. Snare, dowry, plunder, all these names. I can't. Micah is not as easy to unravel as some of the others. Chapter 2. Woe to those who plot evil, who lie in bed planning mischief. And more about economic crimes here, seizing fields and things like that. So more about social justice here. They take over houses, they confiscate things and so on, but not as elegantly put as like Amos, or even not so much as Hosea. Okay, line 6. You people, if any of you are interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, would probably recognize this. Do not rave, and so on. This is quoted in the Damascus document. In other words, it's not rave. What do you have? It's spout. It actually says spout. What do you have in your translation? Huh?
Speak out.
Dribble, spout, yeah. Because the enemy in the Dead Sea Scrolls of the righteous teacher is the spouter of lying. So they apply this passage to him, that he's a spouter, meaning he spouts out lying visions and different things, and they combine it with some material in Ezekiel. They like to take things and combine them in order to describe the present situation that they're in. This is one of the passages that they take. I don't have the original Hebrew in front of me, but this is one of the passages that they're very interested in. Okay, so the question is asked, is Jacob going to be accursed? Has the Lord lost patience? Are they not still his people? And here it speaks of line 8. It is you who play the enemy to my people. The enemy terminology is another important thing in the Dead Sea Scrolls and early Christianity. If you know the Matthew Gospel, the parable of the tares, it's not in the other Gospels. The good tares are sown, and then another person comes and pulls up the good tares and plants tares rather. And this is an enemy came and did this. And then the conclusion is the end of time, the tares will be taken up and thrown into a furnace of fire. It's only in Matthew. These are the only pro-Judaistic parables in the New Testament. For somehow they snuck in there. All the others are anti. And I think that came from the other group. Somehow it bled in there. But in the opposition Christianity of this period, what's called Jewish Christianity, what we call Ebionites, things like that, things that are not really known about in the Western world to that extent, but anyone who studies Middle East history knows about it. These groups felt Paul was the enemy, that he was the enemy, and they took and they labeled him the enemy, and it may have come from that. Here, this passage about the enemy. There's a passage in the letter of James that he who makes himself a friend of man turns himself into an enemy of God. It's James 4:4. And it seems that that's being directed against someone who can't control his tongue. That is a spouter of lying, who can't control his tongue. So it looks like there's some of the same imagery has crept into the letter of James. Then on the other hand, Paul turns it all around again. In Thessalonians 2:15, he says that the Jews, by doing such things, have turned themselves into the enemies of the whole human race. So they're playing with this enemy terminology, is what I'm trying to show you. With a lot of documents, as you've been following some of my things, I marshal this stuff. And this may be one of the sources of it right here, because certainly the previous verse is a source of material in the Damascus document. You say, well, so what? Well, nothing, because I can't see a lot of here to comment on other than that. You know, the rest is, you can make as much of it as I can. And it's a worthless thing, line 10. Do you have that? It's a worthless thing that, is that what you have in line 10?
Or a worthless thing you exact.
Yeah, okay. Were there a man of, what do you, because I don't like my translation here, what do you have there in line 11?
The man of the Spirit came and invented this lie.
Yeah, you see, a man, and the Damascus document continues, someone walking in the Spirit who is spouting lies. And you see, Paul is always talking about the Spirit, walking in the Spirit, you see. So they pull out things like that to attack. I don't say it's attacking Paul, but it's attacking a Pauline-like adversary, using old text to do it. And lying is their key adjective that they apply to such a person. Anyway, we'll leave that go. But that's chapter 2 of Micah is very important to the people in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I haven't even made enough of it in my book. I should rewrite some pages, but I'm not going to. And in fact, everything I have in that book, Linda, you might realize, it's actually comes from teaching these classes. It's reading this stuff over and over again that you get to understand these things. Okay, what else do we have here? Chapter 3. If you see something you want to ask about, please do. Princes of the house of Jacob, rulers of the house of Israel. Those are synonyms. And then now, against prophets, line 5. You lead the people astray. Leading the people astray is a huge phraseology in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that the liar leads the people astray. But here they make it even more clearly what's being, what the straying is. They cry peace, and Ezekiel picks that up. I don't have the passage yet, but in Ezekiel, I think it's Ezekiel 12 or something. The lying prophets cry peace when there is no peace. I applied that to the Carter mission, crying peace when there is no peace. But in any case, darkness on these diviners or prophets, whatever. The sun will set on them, the seers will be covered in shame, and so on. An attack on visionaries and other people who are prophesying lies. But not me, he says, line 8. I am full of strength. What do you guys have for line 8? Yeah. And spirit or breath, spirit and breath in the Hebrew is the same thing. You breathe, and it's also the spirit of justice and courage. Is that what you have there? I don't trust my translation here. What do you have?
Justice and right.
What do you have?
Light and energy.
I have to look at the Hebrew. I didn't bring it. I apologize. I just don't trust some of these translations. This one is from the Kobe Lake in Jerusalem. The people who hid all the scrolls, they did this translation, and they live off it actually. Without this book, they'd be poor as church mice, and I support them. That green Bible too is one that they did. Because it's better than most, it's got titles. Now listen to you, princes of the house of Israel, the house of Jacob, here it is again, theme of loathing justice, righteousness, perverting righteousness, building Zion with blood, Jerusalem with crime. This is very important in the Habakkuk commentary that Dead Sea Scrolls, the blood issue, and so on and so forth. And then here is not Yahweh in our midst. Zion will become a plowland, Jerusalem a heap of rubble, the mountain of the temple of wooded height. This sounds like it was written, you see, after the Babylonian destruction. Now you say, oh, he could foresee it. Well, that's for you to decide. I don't know if he could or he couldn't. You'll have to decide. So there's material in here that some of it seems early, some of it seems late. Chapter 4. And in the days to come, the mountain of the temple of the Lord will be put on the high mountain. This is very inspiring here. But of course, this is exactly, I think, what you'll find in Isaiah 2, 2-4. So, I mean, obviously someone is compiling stuff and putting it together in one small piece here. Now the question is this just before Isaiah, or is this someone taking a nice passage from Isaiah, putting it in here? Because we can look at Isaiah 2 if we want. Let's just take a look. Prove ourselves then. Isaiah 2. Yeah, in the days to come, the mountain temple of the Lord's tower of the mountain lifted up, all the nations will come unto it, and so on and so forth. What are you going to do about that? Even, I'm not against believers. I believe myself in things. Maybe not exactly the way some others do, but in the things that I think are important. Everyone has a belief, but I believe it's important. But what do you, if you're just a believer in Scripture for Scripture's sake, without looking at it, what are you going to do with that overlap there? What would you suggest you do down in these people who think, you know, this whole book is perfect? How would they handle that? You can ask them sometime. I don't know what they're, I don't have an answer for it. I just think there's some, you know, things get messed up in the course of transmission. Other people also crib other things from other people. And it's just the way human beings are, and this is put together by human beings. Anyway, let's look at Micah's version of it. Come, let's go to the mountain where you are, the temple of God, so he will teach us his ways, and we may walk in the paths as from Zion. Again, it is not anti-Zion, this book. People who think that the Jews have some secret plot in Zionism, a lot of people hate the word Zionism. It's just run out of these biblical passages. It's not the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's, you know, it's, if you've ever heard of that book, which is a horrendous, rotten book. And people say, oh, well, is there any truth to it? No, because it's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was ripped off of a text that was written in France in the 1870s against Napoleon III. It had nothing to do with the Jews at all. And the Tsarist secret police who refashioned it, which is what people do all the time, just substituted some of the enemies for Napoleon III. And the Napoleonic conspiracies, and got this other version of things, which is now, handed around in the world, 2/3 of the world taken as true. In the Middle East, Far East, and places like that, they think that's authentic history. In any case, Zion is an honorable word, as you see here, and it really has to do with the restoration to Jerusalem, Jewish nationalism, restoration of the Judean kingdom. Maybe it's unfortunate that someone gave it the name Zionism. Zionism was, as they call it. I'm going to do a Zionism class next fall, history of Zionism and so on. Modern Jewish thought Zionism. So if anyone really wants to look at how this developed, but I can tell you how the term came into being in the 1800s. They're really very passionate people who want to change their lifestyle from studying the Torah or sitting in rabbinic schools and living in ghettos, and wanted to go out and work the land and things like that, and were imbued with socialism and different ideologies of the 19th century of that kind, started a movement that they were trying to inspire people to go back to Palestine, go back to the land. This was before even Zionism, and it was called the Hibat Zion movement, the Love of Zion movement. And that was around in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. And then when Herzl, who was the big so-called prophet of Zionism, came along in the 1900s, he harked back to that name and just dropped off Lovers of Zion and picked out just the word Zionism from it. And that's where the word Zionism comes from. But it actually, you see, it comes from these things here. Since from Zion will go out the law. Of course, the Mormons like it too, because they're very much inspired by these texts, and for them it's the Zion National Park, isn't it? You know, they use these images as well. What was Zion? Where was it? What was it? Well, it was where the Davidic government was. It was the hill. It wasn't really a hill. I mean, it's just like a little. How can I describe it? It's not even as big as Signal Hill, okay? It's like even littler than, it's just a hillock, just a rise in the land where the Davidic palace and, public governmental places were. It's not where the temple was. It's too small for a temple. It's an administrative center of the Davidic kingdom. That's what it was. And, well, we now know what it's become. They will yield authority over many peoples, and they will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, nor shall they learn war anymore, and so on. That's a very famous passage. It's even in the UN above the General Assembly speaker's podium. But I assume they've got Isaiah as the citation there, but it's also here in Micah. Anyone have a comment that they want to make about that, how they think that? Okay, let's leave that. Leading astray. And I will finally gather the lame and bring together those who have been led astray. And I will make a remnant of them. And the Lord will reign over them on the mountain of Zion forever and ever. Those who believe in the Bible see these statements are made forever and ever. They're not made to be abrogated at some point. Not that I think they can't be. I'm just saying that those who like to pick and choose what they like from the Old Testament, you're not doing justice to the document. I mean, you can't take one sentence and then say, oh, well, that's changed now. If the one is true, then the other is true. Or you can do whatever you want, that means, but don't use it then. In any event, you've heard me say that before, I won't continue, but it always strikes me as amazing when I see these statements. I don't think you necessarily should do what the Old Testament says, but then you shouldn't take things from it to support you if you're not going to take the whole thing. So this again looks like a promise of return from the Babylonian captivity. This also looks like later. So, Micah is a mixed thing. And he even has line 10, to Babylon you must go. Line 10, there you will be rescued. So this is certainly later. This does show the signs of having been, worked over. And Amos and Hosea didn't show these signs. Amos and Hosea didn't have anything about Babylon, return from the Babylonian captivity. That's going to be in the second part of Isaiah. It looks like someone has just culled some things from Isaiah and called it Micah. I don't know how that happened, and I can't even tell you. So everything is a bit confused here, but now, writhe, cry out, daughter of Zion, line 10, like a woman in labor. It's like Hosea, O barren who did not bear. And you will have to live in an open country, you will go to Babylon and so on. And many nations, line 11, will be mustered against you. That's sort of like Ezekiel, where all the nations come to Israel and will be destroyed in the Armageddon scenario that you get in Ezekiel. So Zion, you see, is in ruins. When was Zion in ruins? 700 BC now. So again, it's difficult to understand what's going on. I find Micah very confusing, but maybe just read it for the fun of it. Whatever inspiration you see is there. But if you want to try to get a grasp for its homogeneity, it's very tough. Well, let's see what else he says. They don't understand Yahweh, the Lord's purpose, his thoughts. You've been threshed, and it's as if you've been trampled down, and you will, I don't understand all this. And more about fortifications. And then chapter 5. This is a Davidic promise here, which is taken to be a messianic promise, which is taken, of course, to reinforce Jesus' situation too, and why Jesus should be born in Bethlehem, which the New Testament is anxious to have him do. I have Bethlehem in parentheses. It says, but you Ephratah. How many have Bethlehem Ephratah? How many just have Ephratah? What do you have? What do you have? Bethlehem Ephratah. Bethlehem Ephratah.
Different with Bethlehem in parentheses.
Yeah, I think probably in the original Hebrew wasn't there, and that the author wants you, the editor wants you to know what Ephratah is, because Ephratah is another name for Bethlehem. And it comes out strongly, and again in Isaiah. The least of the clans of Judah. Well, I didn't realize that David was from the least of the clans of Judah. The one who will rule over Israel. Now, that's the Christian promise. It's also the Davidic promise. Because David is from Ephratah, Bethlehem. That's where he comes from. Now, Jesus, 1,000 years later, the people who are presenting Jesus in the Scripture feel that Jesus too must be from Bethlehem. But there's a passage in one of the Gospels that really makes you wonder about that, where the crowd comes to Jesus and said, we thought the Messiah had to come from Bethlehem. And that particular passage doesn't say, well, I did. Yeah, I was born there. No, it doesn't say that in that particular passage. I think it's either in Luke or Mark, that passage. You can look it up. You can find these things just by getting a concordance. Look up Bethlehem and you'll find the passage lickety-split. Concordance are really useful to have. Yeah, we thought the Messiah had to come from Bethlehem. And Mark and John don't treat the place of his birth at all, because they're not But if they knew where he was born, they probably would have been anxious to tell us. But they obviously are not either interested or sure of that particular point. It's Matthew and Luke that are giving us the Bethlehem birth stories, and they both give us two different presentations. As you may know, in Matthew, the storyline goes, Jesus' family is living in Bethlehem, but Herod, the Jewish king, well, he's not he's an Arab king, but anyway, the so-called Jewish king, has a prophecy that he's going to be supplanted, and therefore he wants to kill all the Jewish children, and therefore, after Jesus is born, his family flee to Egypt. And then, like Joseph, going down to Egypt, and Joseph is the father, and then they get into the thing, and Matthew loves scriptural passages, I have called my son out of Egypt, he applies that to it. But you see, Luke doesn't know anything about going to Egypt, and neither does Mark or John. The reason Matthew has it is he wants to explain how he wasn't killed in that particular scenario that he's presented us. What's Luke's scenario? Luke's scenario is they're from Galilee, Nazareth, and there's supposed to be a census. And for some reason, if that were the case, by the way, that everyone had to go back to their native city to be counted, the whole Roman Empire would be in total shambles. I mean, that also is not very convincing presentation, sorry to be a naysayer there. But the authors are looking for reasons to, what I'm trying to get is to get him to Bethlehem to be born. They want to get him to Bethlehem to be born. So Luke has read Josephus, we know that. And Josephus speaks of the census of Cyrenius. But unfortunately, the census of Cyrenius was in 6 to 7 AD after the Romans imposed direct Roman control so that they could see what they were controlling for tax purposes. Before that, they had let Herodian kings and others be in control. And the problem, you see, Herod did die in 4 BC, which means Matthew has Jesus born sometime before 4 BC, whereas Luke has him born after 7 AD, both because of the Bethlehem situation. They're both trying to solve the Bethlehem situation, and neither of them, and then one, of course, is probably written in a totally different place than the other, so they don't know, maybe 100 or 200 years later, they're going to collect them all together in the same volume, and then you're going to see a glaring contradiction. But obviously never bothered anyone over 2,000 years. So, yeah.
So the Jewish interpretation of this.
There's no Jewish interpretation.
It would be a Davidic.
Oh, this, yeah.
Davidic.
No Jewish interpretation.
Or just a,
That's, I think, is not Jewish. I mean, this guy doesn't know it. Jesus is coming 700 years later. He's talking about the Davidic family and kingship. That's where he was born.
But King David did come after this when this was written.
No, we came before that.
Before it.
Yeah, guy knows that. You know, this is
So
poetic.
I'm just trying to figure out. So the Jews are still waiting. The fundamentalists Jews are still waiting for a Messiah, right?
I don't know, no idea what you do. I can't answer that question.
Okay.
I don't have any idea. All I know is what Christians say. Because Jews don't say anything because they have no idea about any of these things. They're all disagreeing with each other about everything, and nobody pays any consistent attention to them.
Okay. Are the Jews the general?
There aren't any Jews that have a consistent view, so it's no point saying do the Jews.
Okay, some Jews.
Do you think that Mr. Libby is Jewish? Rabbi so-and-so here from Long Beach in black Hasidic clothes is also Jewish. Do you think Mr. Libby in Cheney's cabinet has any idea in common with the Hasidim at all whatsoever? So when you're talking about Jews, you're dealing with a group of totally disparate people. All they have is an ethnic identity the way a Spanish person would, or a Arab person would, or something like that, but I don't think they have a clear view about this issue that you're bringing. Go ahead, answer the question. I just want to get away from simplistic things.
Do some people?
Yeah, some Jews, a few pious Jews.
They're waiting. Some people are waiting for the Messiah of Jewish descent.
I never met any, but there are some.
Okay,
yeah.
some real,
I never met any who were waiting.
Fundamentalist Jews waiting. Would they be waiting? Would they be thinking they're waiting for a Messiah to come out of Bethlehem?
I have no idea. I really don't. I'm not being I'm not being ornery with you, I just have no idea. I don't think they know themselves. They haven't put it together the way Christians have. They're just looking for a redeemer, but they didn't, go and stitch things out of the text like this, like you have in Matthew's doing it in the New Testament. And I don't think that's clear to someone who's only familiar with the Christian way of approaching it. They just don't have a clear, they didn't try to make a story out of what the Messiah was supposed to be. All they know is they're hoping that someone will come along and make things right, but I don't think anyone even imagines that it would be a Davidic descendant, because nobody that I've ever met even knows who the Davidic descendants are. Only the priests make any claims to be genealogically aware of themselves. People, and even you'll meet them, and half of them won't even realize they're priests. If you meet someone called, I bet you Libby actually is a Levite. I bet the name Libby came from Levi and just got changed a little bit over the immigration patterns. If you had told him, Mr. Libby, are you a priest? He would like, what? He would be totally staggered. And the Cohens are the high priests. They are pretty much aware that they're supposed to be of some lineage, but other than that, nobody I know knows of anything about any tribes. Jews are obviously the tribe of Judah, supposedly, but don't even know that. And none of them have any idea what they expect the Messiah to be, except that he's supposed to make things turn out better. Sorry to disappoint you. I don't want to mislead you or make it oversimplified, because when you hear these things, the Jews are expecting a Messiah still to come, and the Christians are one that's already come, and so on. Well, that's very simplistic in terms of what that's supposed to be what they think. But do they actually think that, the average Jew? I haven't met many who think anything on this particular issue. Anyway, you'll meet some Jews and you'll decide for yourself if I'm correct there. But they might say this because they've been told that that's what they're supposed to say. But now when you ask a question, do they think he's going to come from Bethlehem? Do they think he's going to be a descendant of David? Oh yeah, they'll say he's a descendant of David, but they won't understand how that could possibly be, because they don't know any descendants of David. Anyway, this is a messianic passage here. We all agree on that, in the sense that's how it's been taken. But his origin goes back to the distant past. I can't go any further. You can make of this what you want. The next sentence is about delivering us from Assyria. So I don't think the prophet is really envisioning anything more than his own time here. I don't think he knows anything about Greeks, Romans, Russians, Chinese, I don't think he has any conception of any of that. But I know that's how it's been taken. The reason we're reading is that you have to decide for yourself how you want to see it. But you, Ephratah, least of the clans of Judah. We didn't even know that until we read this. And of you will be born for me the one who is to rule over Israel. His origin goes back to the ancient past. Is that how yours reads? Okay. Any case, let's look at 6. In the end of 5, we have more demolishing of things, pagan things. 6. Now we get a little bit about what we read in Amos and Hosea. Yahweh, the Lord, is accusing his people. Listen, you mountains, to Yahweh's accusation, line 2. So here, I think the Jews were it worked out badly for them that they put these kind of admonitions to try to make them behave better. That prophets were sort of telling the people, look, we want you to behave higher, we want you not to be crude, vulgar, we don't want you to behave like the nations around you. I try to tell my children that in terms of, don't go into the bars, don't go into the porn shops, don't go into the, don't be a stoner, whatever. I try to do that. But the prophets put it in these terms, to try to get the people to behave, to frighten them, to make them more high-minded. And then that was used against them by their enemies later on. Oh, you see, Yahweh is accusing his own people. The Jews did what displeased Yahweh. Well, they could apply it to any people. They could apply it to the Chinese and say, the Chinese are doing what displeases Yahweh. It's just that they were talking to their own people, so they said it to their own people. You could say it to the American Indians, to the Eskimos. The Eskimos and the American Indians weren't stupid enough to write such things down, that other people could see it. That's the problem with what the Jews did to themselves. And of course, they helped a lot of mankind, giving them some religious inspiration, but it redounded against them in a horrifying way. Just read the Quran, which we're doing in another class, or read the New Testament. All these, read Paul. All these passages of this kind are used against them. Every single one goes and looks for them. And there's plenty in here. But I don't think it's like you say in your family, you know, things like this to frighten your children. Anyway, he's telling their history. Look, I brought you out of Egypt, so he knows the Exodus again. I rescued you from slavery. I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. He knows the whole Exodus story as we have it now. And then Balaam, which seems to be fractured here, my editor seems to think, which is in the book of Numbers. And Gilgal's problems there. And something to do with sacrifice problems here. And then finally, all the Lord wants is like Amos says, act justly. Love your neighbor, love decently. Walk humbly with your God. That is the message of each of the prophets, to my mind. That's what they're saying. But they encapsulate it in this very poetic manner, which others, culling it, use against them. So it's very dangerous to write things like this for your neighbors and people around you. If you think other people, your enemies, are going to get a hold of it and then use it. Like, for instance, give me an example for America. We went through a lot of troubles here in America with the civil rights movement, all those sorts of things. We put all our dirty laundry out in public for everyone to see, and then we shot a president. Now, we didn't shoot a president, but if you were overseas and I was and heard them, oh, you see, you Americans killed your own president. You know, that's a hostile person interpreting events here. You know, and that's what happens when the whole world knows what's going on in your country. And then they blame you for what, in fact, troubles that you're going through in your own environment. And it's a very sad thing that, you know, that's what happens often. That's totally ludicrous. Oh, you Americans killed Kennedy. Well, Americans killed Kennedy. Americans were upset that Kennedy was killed. It's like saying, oh, you Americans killed Lincoln. What are you saying? It's that kind of thing. Anyway, more about here. Look, your cities are crammed with violence. Citizens are liars. You can say that about, I could say that about Puerto Rico. I could say that about Rio de Janeiro. But those people are smart enough not to have put it in religious books. So therefore, no one hates Brazilians. No one has any hatred for Brazilians at all. You know, I'm sure the violence in Brazil is astronomical. And the cheating and everything else, and the prejudice and the, you know, exploitation and so on and so forth. Who could write it about Russia or something? Anyway, you have fraudulent measures, you give the short weight on the bushel, every person uses false scales, you fake the weights. This is from Amos, you see. So there's a whole conglomeration of things. 16 is Omri and House of Ahab. Those are northern kings being condemned there. Finally, chapter 7. God, okay, tough stuff in here. The devout, line 2, have vanished. There's no one honest left. Everyone wants blood, hunting down his brother. The judge gives judgment for a bribe. Again, Amos is economic, social injustices. No one puts their trust in a neighbor, no confidence in a friend. You have to be careful of your own wife. Man's enemies are those in his own household. Oh, well, the New Testament took that one too. And then Jesus says, a man is not without honor except in his own household, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, the question is, you really think Jesus wasn't without honor in his own house? Of course he was without honor. All of his family, as we well know, followed him and died almost the same way he did. So all of that is an appeal to overseas people. Those kinds of statements in the New Testament is an appeal to overseas people who are just coming in. Well, Jesus is for you. Jesus wasn't honored in his own household. Anyway, but here is one of the probably passages that was exploited to produce that particular presentation. Anyway, you don't have to agree with me. I'm sure I'm right, but you have the freedom to think whatever you feel on that. But I would be remiss if I didn't point it out to you. Because these are the passages that were sought out intently to produce the material 700 years later. Well, I don't see much else except that we are in line 12, the period of Assyria. Everything is in that period in here, and yet we have stuff that relates to much later. I don't know what to make of Mike. It's an interesting prophet. If you have to write about him on an exam, I wish you luck. Let's look at Isaiah. Isaiah is written at the same time. Isaiah is a massive work. It's, obviously in length almost 8 times as long as Isaiah. I think in quality it's probably 8 times as good as Micah. It's really a superlative piece of work. It has the shortcomings that I told you about. I don't know if they're shortcomings. It is not a unified book. Now, Micah is probably not a unified book either, but it's so short one doesn't bother picking out bits and pieces from it and separating it. So you just leave it as a single whole. There are elements in Micah, as we saw, some from the relate to the Babylonian captivity, some to the Assyrian, and some of you people are even seeing something relating to a period 700 years later. It's possible, but it looks like the stuff from different periods have been embedded in Micah, and even the passage from Isaiah that we saw is embedded in it. Now Isaiah has 3 parts, as I showed you, but let's just review them once more. I will ask you to write about Isaiah in a final exam. Up to chapter 36, it's visionary stuff. Suddenly in 36, it's narrative history. A little bit of that was in Amos too. Remember that little bit that said, "Go away, prophet. Why are you here in the temple of the north?" We don't even knew the name of the official in the north who was yelling at Amos. That sounded very authentic, but it was embedded right in the middle of the prophecy. This is not just a few lines. This is 4 chapters: 36, 37, 38, and 39. Now, if you want to find it, you'll find it in 2 Kings, 18:13. I think it's 18:13. And you might even find it in Chronicles. I have a note here, 2 Chronicles 32:1. I haven't looked at that recently, so I can't tell you. But 2 Kings, definitely, it's there. I can find 2 Kings again. Let's stick our, just to be sure that I don't want you to forget this.
1817.
Yeah, 1813. Yeah, so 2 Kings is a little more complete, I think. I mean, this is not word for word. It's almost word for word. Because 2 Kings starts earlier. Notice, by the way, Lachish is mentioned there in 2 Kings. You see that? This is the reign of Hezekiah. And it talks in line 13 about Sennacherib's, too bad we don't really have time maybe to look at it. Maybe we'll look at it if we have some time later. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, attacked the fortified towns of Judah and captured them. And it talks a lot about Lachish, you see. It even mentions some of the correspondence even here between Lachish and the conquerors. In any case, is it word for word? Not really, but pretty close. Pretty close. You can check it out. I don't have time to do it in front of you, but you can check it out. So the question is, okay, you can say the person who put the King's book together certainly came later because he was a compiler. He's speaking about 20 or 30 different kings. So obviously he could have clipped a passage out of Isaiah that he thought was relevant. On the other side of it, and I think this is more likely, Isaiah probably was only 35 chapters to begin with. Then later on, as people were putting stuff together, they said, well, let's get that stuff because I want to know this is about from the King Hezekiah material that related to Isaiah because he's mentioned there. Let's tack that on to the end of it here. And so they tacked that on from the other books. And then some new people came along 200 years later and started tacking on some more material. We're going to tack on that. Let's tack on some other material. And we can, in tacking it on to Isaiah, we get the benefit of Isaiah's prestige as a great prophet. So in chapter 40, the most beautiful part of Isaiah is tacked on to the previous two portions. And that goes to about 60-something, about 20 chapters. And scholars even divide that up. I'm not able to do that. I'm not that good. But this is the famous part of Isaiah, this material here in Isaiah 2. I think it's exquisite myself. I think it's probably as good as anything ever been written. You see, if you can get a couple of exquisite things in a book, you're doing well. And of course, no one's ever forgotten this. And of course, this too has been reapplied elsewhere, because now the comfort ye my people, speak to the heart of Jerusalem, line 40, 41 and 2. See, here's the stuff about your crimes, all that sort of thing again. Your time of service, because the prophets interpret history. All the bad thing was a result of evil that you did. All the good things was a result of good things that you did. Why did they interpret it like that? Because they didn't have an afterlife. They didn't have the idea of the resurrection of the dead. If you have the idea of the resurrection of the dead, you don't need to interpret history like that. You can just say, oh, well, don't worry, if you're good in this life, the afterlife, you're going to be rewarded. Now, that's not what they said. If you're good in this life, you or your descendants will be rewarded. If you're bad in this life, you and your descendants will suffer. And if you didn't suffer, don't worry, the next generation will. And it works out that way to some extent. Bad people often have really bad descendants. And not that they're bad people, the descendants, but they have horrifying situations because they've been badly brought up, and also, there are bad things that have been going on. And it tends to infect them, whereas good, wholesome people, usually their descendants are pretty, pretty wholesome too. And because they haven't had their minds all messed up by somebody. Like if someone's been beating up on somebody or having sexual intercourse or incest with his own offspring or something like that in the household, usually it comes to, later on it comes back. Not in that the person is responsible, it's just the person has problems that come back from that stop that person from being able to function in a wholesome manner later on so readily. So anyway, I was just listening coming up. I was the worst thing I've ever heard in ages on public radio. The guy was talking about lobotomies, and he had a lobotomy down here in California when he was 12 by some guy who used to put ice picks into people's eyes, and go into the brain like that. And he had been put there because his mother died, and his father had married a woman who hated him and wanted to get rid of him, and convinced the husband that this was a problem child. And this guy had been suffering from this for 40 years, his whole life. And now he's in his late 50s, early 60s. He's, he survived it and everything. And he wanted to go around and find all the other people that were treated like this. And he went and ran around and found horror stories everywhere. And then he confronted his father, who was still alive in a nursing home, with this. He never confronted him. And Dad said, oh, well, she controlled my mind, or something like that. I didn't really want to, but, so. But this guy has been suffering his whole life from this. His whole mental being has suffered. So the next generation often does suffer horribly from what you inflict on them. So, the Hebrews did not have an idea of afterlife at this point. Now, I've told you that the first idea in the Bible, you haven't seen it anywhere here. The first statement of it comes in the book of Daniel, which is considered a very late book, and which is one of the reasons maybe the rabbis didn't want it in the Bible. I don't know. It's only in the, it's not in the prophets in the Jewish Bible. It's in the prophets in the Christian Bible. The rabbis had a real big thing against Daniel. I like Daniel. It's an apocalyptic book, very interesting for the Maccabean period, and it has one of the effects of the Maccabean uprising. Daniel is clearly a book of literature that comes out of the Maccabean uprising and relates to eyewitness account of some of the events of the Maccabean uprising, but most people wouldn't know that if they don't know anything about the Maccabean uprising. In any case, this line 40, comfort ye, console my people. And the joy of what goes on here from chapter 40 on is taken in the Christian presentation to relate to Jesus' birth. And everyone sings this on Christmas, Hallelujah chorus, Handel, and so on and so forth. Very beautiful music. I used to sing it myself when I was in high school. I was in the chorus. I loved it. Very inspiring music. The problem is that we will see it isn't even in this where you see it here. Does not relate to that event at all. It relates to the freeing of the Jews from the Babylonian captivity, and the comfort is God's comforting them to return from the captivity. You say, "Oh no, Professor Eisenman, that couldn't be right." I will prove to you, either at the end of this period or next period, that that is absolutely right, and that there is no other way that you can interpret these passages if you read them all and don't take them out of context. So yeah, you can take something saying, comfort ye, comforted, and apply it to any nice event in any period of time and place. Or you can say, we're happy, this is a wonderful thing, we're so happy, and apply that to any time and place, joy to the world, and so on. But the fact of the matter is, the prophet is not applying it to any other event than the one that he's talking about, which is the return of the Jews from captivity. Even the Jews don't know that, so I don't want to say this is a Jewish interpretation. This just is what the book says. Now, I would go further than that. I'll tell you that this, I think Isaiah 40 to 60 something, or wherever it's thought to leave off, was actually given to Cyrus as a prophecy of his success and his coming, to convince him to let the Jews return from Babylon to rebuild their homeland. And there's passages in here which are addressed to Cyrus, literally. And Cyrus, if you know the history, is the Persian conqueror who destroys Babylon, conquers it, and then lets the Jews who are there go back to rebuild their temple in his honor. And I think that's why this was tacked on to Isaiah. That's why I'm talking about it now. Because they wanted to give this new poetic greeting of Cyrus's coming. They wanted to give it such prestige that Cyrus would be able to be impressed by it. So that they could say, look, Cyrus, we knew you were coming. In fact, our prophet even called you by name. Because, in fact, in this chapter 40, 60 material, Cyrus is actually called by name as the Messiah. They say, my Messiah, Cyrus. And he will accomplish my whole plan. And I think that this is for reading people reading in university, not in a religious institution. People want to read it carefully, not just for spiritual uplift, which is good too. But you can read it for uplift because it's so beautiful. But I think that that was tacked on here, that's what I'm talking about, for that reason. So that they could say, look, Cyrus, our prophet foresaw your coming 200 years ago. You know, Isaiah wrote this 200 years ago, and he knew you were coming. And he wants you to let us go. He wants you to free us. He wants you to send us back to our homeland. And the reason I'm talking about it now is because I think that's how Isaiah got to be this way. That the people deliberately presented it like this. That being said, still, chapter 40 and so on is really so beautiful that it is, no wonder people take it to relate to all kinds of things. There's so many beautiful things in it, but I will just show you before the break, if I can, so you don't think I'm a total scoundrel here, you know, one other person saw this, not me, I'm the only person, a lot of people have seen it. One other person recently saw this and used it in his activities. Do you know who that was? David Koresh. Did you ever hear of him? He was the one in Waco who they, he had his whole following down there, and he said that he was the Messiah, and he called himself David because that's the name of them. So I think he came from San Diego. And he took the name Koresh. Well, you know why he took the name Koresh? Because Hebrew for Cyrus is Koresh. And he knew that Isaiah 45:1, I'll show it to you. Thus, this translation is of course doesn't want to say it. It starts in 44, the end of 44. And I am he who says of Jerusalem, let her be inhabited, and of the towns of Judah, let them be rebuilt. And I will raise their ruins once more, and I am he who says of the oceans, be dry, I will dry the rivers. And I am he who says, Koresh, that's Koresh, Cyrus. That's where David Koresh got his name from. He understood that Koresh was the name of the Messiah. My shepherd, he will fulfill my whole purposes, saying of Jerusalem, let her be rebuilt, and of the temple, let the foundations be laid. Thus saith the Lord to, not his anointed. All the people who don't want you to think this is messianic, write in his anointed. He will say to his Messiah, Cyrus, whom he has taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him, and strip the loins of kings, to force gateways before him, that their gates be closed no more. And I will level before you, leveling the heights. I will shatter the doorways. I will smash the iron bars, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I'll read you that after the break at some point, but the point of Isaiah is that Cyrus is being called by name, who will fulfill God's whole plan according to these people. And the whole plan is the restoration and the return from the captivity. And that's what they're being comforted with. They're being comforted from the fact that they have been in captivity, slavery, and servitude, and they're joyful, and the messenger on the mountains is to proclaim the fact that they're returning. Anyway, Isaiah is a great book. We'll look at how it's constructed after the break. I read you that just so you wouldn't be angry at me.